Thank you so much, everyone, for taking time out of your busy days to come and join our webinar. We have a super exciting one today with Nilesh joining me. He's going to be talking about how ZS drives process improvement using process simulation from iGrafx. Just some housekeeping notes before we start. Everyone will be muted for the duration of the webinar, but if you do have any questions, we certainly encourage you to ask them. If it makes sense, we might take some live during the webinar. If not, certainly at the end, we will take time to answer them. I ask that you please put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat box. It'll make it easier for us to see them. Also, the webinar will be recorded, so if you do have to drop, we hope you can stick on for the entire time, but if you do have to drop, we can send that out afterwards so you can get a copy. And with that, I think we can go ahead and get started. So let me start by introducing Nilesh here. He's an operational excellence leader with over 18 years of experience leading strategic transformations across different industries like financial services, pharma, and high tech. He has a track record of spearheading large-scale initiatives focused on global process harmonization, change management, and program implementation. So an impressive background. We're so thankful for him to be here today. A great customer, and I've also personally enjoyed our interactions before. We've been together at a couple of events that iGrafx has done. So Nilesh, with that, I will hand it over to you to introduce yourself a little bit more and talk about ZS.
Great. Thank you, Max. I'm very excited to be here, everyone. So as Max mentioned, my name is Neelish Harmolker. I am currently with ZS, which is a global management and technology professional service firm. Been here for about 7 years, a little over 7 years this October. And I run our Process Excellence Expertise Center, which is primarily focused on process transformation, business transformation, bringing everything from your current state understanding all the way through your implementation and change. And so a lot of our work is done with with these pretty cool tools that we'll go through in a few minutes. A little bit about ZS. We are a 40-year-old company. We celebrated 40 years, I believe, this year.
Congrats.
Thank you. We have about a little over 13,000 people globally, spread across the Americas, the Americas, EMEA, and Asia Pac. And as you can see, we have, 37 plus offices kind of around the world. A little bit about what we offer, and I won't go through all this stuff because we'll want to get into the meat of our session today. But we offer everything from strategy through technology through operational work. You can read over here kind of what we do, and I'm always happy to answer questions of, who we are, what we do in a kind of offline, if there are any.
Awesome. Thanks for that intro. And as the title suggests, and for anyone that read the webinar abstract, we're certainly going to be talking a lot about one tool in particular today, and that is process simulation. So maybe do you want to take a second just to kind of level set how you feel about simulation, some of the benefits that you see, and then maybe we can get into some more specifics in a little bit?
Yeah, so and thanks for the question. So I think let me start off with a little bit of context of kind of our journey as we do through this. So as we go through this. So a couple of years ago, so our space, our expertise center has existed for something close to 10 years. We've gone from using Visio to using things like Lucid Charts and Miro and Mural, things like that to really help our clients visualize their current state processes, um, re-engineer for the future state, like remap what things could look like, change swim lanes, everything that I'm sure folks on this line are very used to doing. Really kind of map out to almost the operating procedure level and, get us to a point where we can say confidently, this is what your future state will bring. This is what your ROI would be doing. You get out of changing your business, right? And a lot of that was heavily time consuming. We would run time and motion studies. We would go and sit with maybe not stopwatches, but we would actually go there, understand the weight, the types of scenarios that happen? Is it complex? The level of complexity, the volume, how many people were there doing this work, and then mathematically do this in Excel. And then kind of figure out how to overlay this with a process map that was not very usable. I mean, I'm sure most of you know Visio is great for what it was used to doing, but it's not very amenable to, changes and things like that. Um, and so over the last couple of years, I guess starting in 2022, early 23, or sorry, late 21, early 22, we decided that we need to up our game. Our clients were asking us a lot of, well, what if I change this? Or what happens if I move this process earlier? Can you quantify, the changes for me? Now, without going through another extensive, recalculation of everything, um, we started to look at, given kind of these client conversations, we started to look at other tools that were in the market that were saying, how do we actually do this, right? How do we run what if scenarios? Monte Carlo simulations, in essence, right? How do we actually figure out if we were to change something, what is the impact to the actual process? In Visio, you can't really do that. At least as much as we've tested it, was not able to do. Lucid Charts is a great collaborative tool, but it is two-dimensional, right? It's only you put in on paper your process, but you can tell, well, if I actually change step C to step B, or if I parallel process B and C, would that create more bottlenecks, different bottlenecks? Would that actually drive my throughput? And so one of the things that we did is we searched the market, we tested quite a few vendors, everything, big to small. And we looked at what problems we were trying to solve, right? Our clients were, I need to test what if scenarios. Our clients were asking, how do I actually identify the risks, right? And then how do I quantify the ROI without having you recalculate or them having to recalculate everything in Excel? Um, and so we ended up on simulation. We came across iGrafx. We spent a lot of time with the iGrafx team to understand the tool, its capabilities. Um, and then we ended up settling with the desktop version. Again, this is a couple of years ago. So, and then we've opened up so many more doors from our side, from our client side. We've really kind of struck a nice chord of a nice balance of saying we can map anything, virtually anything, right? We can digitize your process. Um, in essence, make that digital twin view of that process, and then start actually figuring out if I were to change resources, right, from step by at a step level, at a top level, what would happen? What would happen if I had unlimited resources and my client's goal, or we're working with our partners to say, I need to increase my throughput by 10x. Where is the process going to break today if I just had everything as is? So we were able to really kind of dig into these questions, which created a huge amount of benefit for our clients. Um, from a risk perspective, we could do this in a relatively, risk-free environment, right? So how many times can you say, I'm going to change a process and I'm going to try to see what is going to happen without actually having a big impact to the BAU and what's happening today. So we're able to take, the process of the future, pop it in here, start playing with it, from a clinical trial perspective, for example, one of the areas that we're focusing on is we were driving the volume of studies. If my studies increased by 4, 5, 6, 7, 10x, what happens, right? And so we were able to kind of map out those processes, figure out where the bottlenecks are, figure out if there's going to be any big compliance risks, right? That come out in the regulatory world, and then be able to deploy this new process or this new kind of way of working, I should say, um, in a client after thoroughly testing it as much as we could. And then the quantifiable ROI, as process experts, as process, team members here, as leaders in of BUs, what is the one thing that you need that has to come out of this is I need to make a business case for change, right? I need to know that if I'm going to spend $500,000 in this change, that my ROI is going to yield more than that, and in how long, right? So what we're able to do based on the kind of changes that we're making, right? The cost factors that we are putting into the simulation tool, shows us where we're going to either reduce costs or increase costs, or if we need to, solve for certain things, then we can figure that out. But I think it's been a pretty good view of like, being able to use simulation has been almost a game changer in our world, at least.
And Nilesh, I know that there's like a bunch of you talked about the widespread use, and there's different industries and use cases that this can apply to. Um, you talked about some of the changes that you were proposing, things like rebalancing resources or considering adding more, removing resources. And of course, resources could be people, they could be automation, different technologies. Now AI is a big thing, right?
Yep.
Are there any, maybe despite that sprawl of use cases that you've seen with all the different customers that you've worked with, are there any specific like industries or trends today, technologies, otherwise, where you see simulation kind of being a consistent win
Mm.
across these different ones? Or is it really kind of, individually, each case is unique?
No, that's a great question, Max. So we have spread our simulation capabilities across pharma, specifically within the clinical trial process, within commercial operations. We've spread them across financial services, across insurance, right? If we're doing claims management, order to cash is a huge one that we've seen a lot of great success in. And those are probably, three or four of them that I can name off the top of my head. But we've gone through everything. We've tested simulation tools in a huge amount of world. Everything from, I'm just remembering, we did a little bit of transportation and logistics, right, on the supply chain side. We were able to look at some of the manufacturing world and pull some of, specific processes in here. One of the things that, and we'll get to this later too, but I'll spoil my own surprise, is that simulation is awesome when you have data to use, but you also need to understand that um, you don't need to have 100% accurate data. I think one of the big things that we were falling into was, oh, we have data, it's not great. How can this really help me? One of the challenges to that statement is no company, organization, industry that I've seen so far has perfect data. I've worked in financial services for 10 plus years of my life, my career. I spent some time in insurance, pharma now, high tech. I've not seen a company that has like, we are amazing at data. Even some of the high tech firms. And so where we've pivoted to show that where these can help is if we can get anecdotal data that is directionally correct, you can make really good decisions from here. You don't need to be rooted in like the minutia of the data, but you do need to be able to see where you're heading. And I think, even talking with folks on the ground doing the work, those are the ones that understand how long it takes, right? They're the ones that understand, well, if I punt it to, this stakeholder group, they're taking their time and then they come back, here are the questions that they come back with, right? So you can start to kind of pull out what the nuances are, the subtleties are, how long things are taking. And if you really do need that level of grounded data, we run time and motion studies separately and then put that information in here. And being able to then pull that into here, we say, okay, well, we're grounded in exactly what happens today, and this is what it looks like. And many times, it's typically worse, right, than people have expected it. But then simulation really showcases the value of it's worse than people are saying, and therefore we need to fix it. Here's the ROI that you're going to get out of it, and you're going to be able to kind of run through different scenarios, and let's pick the most optimal one. And maybe the most optimal one is not your final future state, right? It can be incremental. Let's work through the incremental changes, and we know that through what we've done personally is we now have the roadmap, and now we can run through what each change would be, automation, AI implementation, and let that run. Now we run it again, right? We can then, run X number of scenarios, which is probably the most awesome thing I've come across, is the ability to run all of those scenarios in different configurations and then see the differences back and forth. So, but I think industry wide, there are probably certain cases it won't be good, but there are certain cases where, um, as long as all the stakeholders are bought in that this is directional, this will give a really good idea. It may not be rooted in every little minute of data, but it will be enough to give the roadmap to develop kind of what tools you're going to need. Um, and things like that. One last thing I'll probably say is we're working on a project that we've just taken this end-to-end sales life cycle and threw it in here. And we're able to see everything from lead ingestion to opportunity closed won, and then further down the line. So it has its wide-ranging uses, I think.
Awesome. So we've talked in the abstract a bit here about the value that we drive. Let's get specific. Let's hear some of those stories about those specific examples. So I know you've prepared a couple here that you want to talk about. Before we jump into this, I will take a quick question from the audience. They ask, I'm assuming this is a discrete event simulator, and yes, from the iGrafx side, our simulation engine is discrete event simulation. I know that there are a lot of Monte Carlo simulators in the market. Nilesh talked about evaluating a bunch of different vendors that have those, but yes, ours is discrete event simulation, and I won't bore the audience with the differences there because I know we have a range of people. But if you want to have a conversation about the differences, happy to share there. So Nilesh, back to you. Why don't you tell us concretely about some of these projects that you've used simulation in and what the results have looked like?
Yeah, no, happy to. So yeah, everyone loves numbers, right? So we're all process transformation folks, and we want to make the case, right? So we started this with order to cash, but I'll just for ease of sake start from the top. More recently, we've spent time in the clinical R&D space. So one of the big things for pharma, um, big and small pharma, is to reduce clinical time from study to trial, right? And get the therapeutic out to the market as soon as you can. On average, we're talking 10 plus years, right? From start to finish. And every year counts, right? Every week counts as that is. So what we've been working on with many clients is taking apart the clinical trial process and focusing on specifics, right? One of the areas is the last patient, last visit. So basically, during a clinical trial, you've got these trial sites, and patients are going. And from there, once you get that last visit of your last patient, there's a bunch of things that need to happen to submit your trial information. I won't go through all the specifics of that on this call, but basically, it is a very complicated process to go through. Takes a lot of time, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of effort that's needed to get through. What we did do is we worked with our client to model out scenarios from how we can parallel process certain things, right? How can we run different steps, different stakeholders that are using very similar information in almost the same time, right? versus it being waterfall, right? Where it's, one has to finish before one has to start. In this case, we're able to find those synergies. And at the end, we were able to cut the timeline by, 48%, almost 50% here. And so the idea is like I said, every week counts in the clinical trial side. So taking out almost half of the time here reduces your overall time. At least it did in this case. So this was a big win for one of our clients, right? We're able to help them speed up their submission process, and then get it out to the FDA as quickly as possible. Huge win, right? The other area is forecasting. So almost every department, every organization has to do some level of forecasting, whether it's incentive comp planning to, just your quarterly forecast for your teams. In this case, it was incentive comp planning and what are the forecasts going to be for that and things like that. So what we did was there was a huge amount of man hours, people hours spent in doing this work. Huge teams, right? Able to drive all the steps and get all the data and manipulate it and things like that. So with simulation and then with automation, because ultimately simulation is a tool, right? You don't realize your benefits without actually implementation here. So with simulation, we identified somewhere around the 40% mark to cut out the number of hours required, right? And we said, well, if we automate these particular steps, if we put AI, kind of or not even just AI, like even RPA, right? Robotic process automation, to handle the steps in non-working hours. We are able to expand the workday, reduce the actual hours required to do this by people, and then we simulated multiple different scenarios until we found kind of that optimal one for the client at their stage, and that ended up with about a 40% decrease in total hours needed. Huge amount of savings for them, right? They were able to redeploy this team doing this work to more strategic efforts and spend more time in actually looking um, at different things rather than focusing on heavy manual labor.
Nilesh, maybe before you
Um,
go into
yeah,
the next two examples, just a a question there about that. So you're talking about testing all these different ideas and configurations and hypotheses that you have, doing that what if analysis. Where do those ideas come from? Is this something that you're suggesting based on your body of expertise? Is it like an executive has an idea, or there's some sort of internal mandate, or maybe both? Like where do you how do you figure out what to test in the first
yeah.
place?
Great question. I'm sure that's a question on everyone's mind too. It's a combination of both, right? So, we bring a lot of expertise. We've got a lot of domain expertise. We've got folks that have done a lot of these things for 20 plus years, 30 plus years. To kind of bring to bear we know how this works. Now, when we go into our clients, we're usually looking at, well, and honestly, we go in from a consulting side, but on the other side of the table, right, the questions are still the same. How do I make my organization more efficient? How do I make it more effective? How do I kind of drive more automation so the team that, my team or, other employees that are working here are more satisfied with their jobs, right? That they're doing more than just grunt work. Because I think, as we know, especially in this day and age, a lot of team members, they are directly correlated with how happy they are in the jobs and how long they stay with organizations, right? And so to reduce also the training costs of bringing someone new when people leave, things like that. One of the things, one of the problems is how do we keep people happy, right? And one of the big levers is people don't want to sit here and doing heavy manual labor to day in and day out. So as we think about these bigger, more strategic problems, we're figuring out is, well, now how do we figure out, how do we think about changes and transformations in those lenses? Um, in the clinical trial side, it's very much how do we get through our trials faster so we can get the therapeutics out to the broader population, to solve some bigger problems, right? Not even just internally to our organization, but now externally to their end users, right? So these are the kind of things that we go in with, right? And then we look at um, how do we actually understand this, right? We can't just put a number out there. We can't just change things without knowing what the impacts are. And so, now we'll typically go in with saying, let's do a really quick understanding of what you're doing today, map it out here. Let's get some information, resources, time, cost, time by step, distribution, how fast your things are coming in versus how fast you need them. And then start solving for these problems, right? Okay, well, if your problem is I don't want people doing a lot of manual work, well, we have 20 steps that can be automated. Now, what if we automated 5 of these steps? Do they create a bottleneck somewhere else, right? So you need to be thinking about a lot of these different conversations. So I think, Max, to your question of is how do you come up with these problems? It's a conversation that needs to be had. It's you connect things to your strategic objectives, to how you need to execute, to monitoring, right? Your KPIs and things like that. And then you have to utilize the right tools, right? Like we tried this in Visio, we tried this in Lucid Charts. Again, both good tools for their purpose of what I like to call two-dimensional mapping. Um, but ultimately, those process maps sit on a shelf, right? They don't, it's very hard to manipulate them and tell me, oh, well, if I have this data now it's changed, now what happens? So thinking about how we kind of use kind of this next gen tool to drive it really helps. And I think one of the things that we are looking at already is not just taking simulation as is, but how do we combine simulation with a little bit more of the AI, next gen tech world to now drive more insights of what we're driving, right? Or help us actually, potentially create process maps that allow us to speed up even current state understanding to get us to future state world.
Cool. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the other two case studies that you have?
Yeah, super quick, right? I don't want to bore you guys. And again, if there's questions, feel free to let me know, throw them in the chat. So pricing and contracting, we reduce timelines, lots of manual inefficiencies, lots of someone having to read a contract, store it in SharePoint, then someone looking at it. So in combination with, hey, we understand, contract lifecycle management, so this is what good looks like. Let's amend it to your, kind of our client's process here, and we're able to kind of eliminate a huge amount of manual work here. And then order to cash, again, this process crosses everything from manufacturing to pharma to insurance to financial services, whatever it is. But like, you can do quote to cash, order to cash all the way through. You touch accounting, you touch everything else. This example was in the med tech, med devices world where we're able to streamline their order to cash process. We took out somewhere in the range of 55 to 70% of process inefficiencies. That doesn't account for automation that we threw in there after the fact. But we're able to run these simulations again. And their problem, my goal is to increase revenue, right? Which means I need to increase my throughput by 10x. Where is my process going to break if I literally did nothing today? We put it in, we took their current throughput, multiplied by 10, distributed the right way that they wanted to, how they typically see it in the real world, not how we are just imagining it. And we found out that even if we fixed the order entry, that created backlogs, white space all across the process. So looking at that, being able to see kind of where things are blocking, where things will still get stuck no matter what you do. We removed a huge amount of just manual error, manual processes, automated a bunch of things, had more systems connected, right? Because we showed that if your systems are connected, this is where the speed also comes up to. So things like that, again, we look at the problems. We don't just go in and, we're not using simulation as the hammer for every nail. We're not trying to look at a solution in search of a problem. But the way that we've been approaching this has been, here's your problem. Now, can we use simulation? And we've been pretty successful in the last 2 years so far.
And maybe just a general question, like across these projects, I'm something I've been asked multiple times myself. I'm sure the audience wants to know for these projects, like kind of you talked about specifically kind of tactically what you did, but in terms of like who needs to be involved for these projects to be successful, you mentioned the stakeholders. So, is that executives? Is it IT? Is it
Yep.
some center of expertise for the customer? Like who's involved and like how long do these projects take? And I'm sure that varies customer to customer, but if you could give any sort of, as you pointed out, directional guidance, that might be useful.
Yeah, no, good question. So I think from the who needs to be involved is obviously you need to have before any of this happens, right? You need to have a sponsor, or sponsors that are driving towards change, right? I know we call ourselves a process excellence expertise center. I think many folks here are process experts. The way that we've been starting to look at this now is like it's more transformation, transformation people, right? We need to be able to look at more than just one single process at a time, because one single process at a time doesn't actually make a difference, is what we've seen. So what does that mean? We need to have executive buy-in, right? I think before anything happens, there needs to be an understanding, and this is where change management and change activation come into play. There needs to be an understanding that change needs to happen, right? And that can be as simple as, look, if our strategic objective is creating a end-to-end order-to-cash process that can run 10,000 transactions per month, right? And today we're running 2,000 transactions per month. That KPI is very powerful, right? You're only running 20% of what you actually need to do because based on your strategic objective, that's driven in probably revenue, right? And that goes up into your financial big metrics, right? That start to go up. So you need to have that baseline. Once you get that, we've tripped up. Our journey hasn't been easy, but I think one of the things that we've learned very well and we've applied, towards our future after that was this starts with the business, right? We got to solve business. Like, we typically solve business problems, but if we don't have tech involvement, right, at all, we lose. We may not see the full picture. And we did that on a couple of projects, right? We focus on the business. Primarily, we came back and said, "Hey, we can get all the savings." And then the tech team came back and said, "Well, yeah, but we can't actually connect that. Or if we do connect that, that will take a huge amount of time to connect these systems because they're not easily connectable. And so, or it will cost a huge dollar amount. So I think the other thing is having tech and business together when you're actually creating your process, right? Or when you're looking at what you need to do. And then making sure that kind of that that mid-level buy-in too of, sorry, not mid-level buy-in, the changes you are making impact people's job here, right? This is not just moving boxes on a page or in a tool, right? These are real steps that, real people do. So also getting buy-in from the folks that are on the ground doing this work. Could this actually be done? Can this step actually be automated here, right? And so a lot of change activation needs to happen, but also that buy-in, that level of buy-in brings them along the journey, allows them to see what's happening, right? It's a change that's being done with them versus being done to them, and allows them to also be creative here to say, hey, look, you know what, I hate this step or these 5 steps. I want to get this off my plate because I'm not spending enough time in doing more strategic thinking or more like focus on other areas that I really want to focus on. Um, I want to help you do that, and here are some ideas, right? Even as a consulting company, we are not the know-it-all. So we also leverage people on the ground doing this for their time to be able to provide that right input. And I think if you can get those level of buy-in, along with the right change activation, it's super, super critical. A lot of this stuff, then you can start to realize very quickly.
And when you say quickly, the second part of that question, what's the typical timeline that you?
So yeah, like, I was hoping you'd forget about that question. So look, a project can last anywhere between typically what we say 6 to 12 weeks, right? But that is just getting into the nitty-gritties, doing the simulation, coming up with the business case and things like that. I think again, this is not any tool we use is not the final, the final word on this change, right? You need to actually then go through your transformation journey, right? Even if you're changing a few steps in a big process, you need the right change activation comms that go out. You need the right structure to be combined with process changes. Um, so depending on the size of the change, right? Like what is your size of the prize at the end of the day? Is it many incremental changes that lead to a bigger picture that you can quick wins throw out there? Hey, if it's just I do this step a little quicker or I move this step up in my operating procedures, and we know that without changing anything else, that will already have a big impact within 12 weeks, great, you can do that, right? This doesn't have to be a huge endeavor. But if it's like, well, I'm going to automate all this stuff, again, then you need to figure out how much tech is involved. Do you have the tools? Do you see the need for every tool? Do you have the data, right, to do all this stuff? Those are bigger conversations that need to be had. And then, the timeline to realizing value is longer. But at least now with this picture in mind, you have that roadmap to be able to realize that value and know where you're going to have then more value drops down the line.
Awesome. So looking at the timing here, I'd say let's maybe take 5 more minutes, talk a little bit more about the, kind of overall lessons learned, best practices that you've seen from doing as many projects as you have.
Yeah.
And then let's get to some audience questions. So I'll take the time now to just give a reminder. We're more than happy to answer questions that the audience has. Please put them in the Q&A box. And like I said, we'll take 5 minutes here to talk about best practices and then spend any remaining time answering your questions.
Yeah, I think I've covered probably most of this, right? And kind of what we've already talked about. Um, Not every process requires simulation, right, to understand the effect of change. We shouldn't look at this as a um a solution in search of a problem here. I think we went through this journey, um, and we realized not every process can run through simulation. I mean, in theory, yes, but what is the actual output and value created was not much. So you need to understand what is it that we're trying to get to, and what's the answer you're trying to, problem statement that you're trying to solve, and then use the right tools for that. I think what we've experienced over the last two plus years um, is that most of our operational problems, order to cash, things like the clinical trial processes, forecasting, the sales life cycle, all within those can use pockets with simulation has been super amazing. Um, and then when you tag this along things like process mining, right? I know a lot of the tech is now moving towards kind of the AI world, the process mining world. One of our big things is, well, how do I actually understand process, like my mining? Like I'm mining all the data from my processes, my tasks, and now I can use my simulation. But again, not everything is the nail in sort of, taking the hammer to every nail, right?
Neelesh,
Um,
do you mind if I take a second just to explain process mining to the audience
yeah,
briefly for anyone that
yeah,
might not be aware? So for those that don't know, process mining is a technology that taps into your core IT systems. Think your ERPs, your CRMs, HRMs, right? Those systems typically provide an audit log of activity that's actually happening. And so they automatically ingest that and then can give you some process visualization, some metrics on it. So Nilesh was talking about those time and motion studies, right? From a system viewpoint, you can see exactly how long it's taking to process this invoice, to process this customer order, to process this service ticket, whatever it is. And so it's using some technology to get those inputs that you need for the simulation. That Nilesh talked about some other ways you can do it, but sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Just wanted
nope,
to bring the audience with for anyone that might not know.
nope. Thank you, Max. Um, Data is your friend, right? But again, you need to set that expectation that not everything at a very granular level is going to be available. Uh, if people over here have seen or work with organizations that you can tell me I've got the best data, I would love to hear what you're doing. And your data is clean and perfect all the time because in my 18 years of experience, I've never seen that happen. But I think what we have, again, so we've set the expectations at all levels that this is not meant to be uh, perfect down to the minute. One of the awesome things that we love about simulation, and we haven't honestly, and maybe this is my bigger plug for iGrafx than anything else, is we are able to put a time bound at every step. It's minimum this, maximum this for every step. Now I haven't seen that in many other tools, but I think the ability to understand, this step can be 2 weeks up to 5 weeks. And then the simulations are taking that into account based on, your throughput. Um, it provides directional input, right? But again, from a change activation, conversation perspective with leadership, it doesn't really matter, internal, externally consulting, not consulting, that needs to be set. This is not, unless you have that clarity of data, this will be directional, but it plays a huge part in decision making that we would not have been able to achieve what I shared on the previous page, without that first expectation. Making the change is a lot easier. I'll tell you this, growing up in the finance world where everything needs to be, rooted in numbers and rooted in ROI. Um, sh I wish I had something like this, back then. Being able to actually quantify the change, even directionally. If I can put in, hey, this resource fully loaded costs are 100K per year. Right. You break that down by until the hour, but you can put your costs in. You can put your time in. You put these like specific factors in, run multiple scenarios, run, the X number of volume through this system. We've tried to break it, but we've pushed it to its limit and then said, here is your change, right? Now let's talk about the business case. Now let's run this up the totem pole to say, we need to fix it. This connects with our strategic objectives. Now we can paint a picture of what's happening today, what could be tomorrow, and here's your roadmap, right? A lot easier to do now than even a few years ago, at least for us, because it's the ability to expand upon that case for change um, has been beneficial. And then I think that the last thing, this is to come to the earlier point, you have a lot of organizations I've worked with have a modeling component, where you just put all of your process models in, right? This is how you're going to map it. This is how you're going to kind of maintain it, with the right COEs, Center of Excellences, with the right governance, all that stuff. You put your risks and your people in. But it stops there. And so again, to me, that's great that you have the documentation, but processes change every day. Some people, people are doing things differently, right, than what you've documented. Risks are different, things like that. Running a FMEA, like a failure mode, where is a process going to fail? Is very hard to understand if that is not combined with, well, if I'm tracking continuous improvement, I need to run simulation and then eventually mining, right? And then when you're looking at mining, how does that compare to what you've actually documented, right? Conformance testing, things like that. So being able to combine kind of this bigger ecosystem, now ecosystems may be the wrong word, but maybe being able to combine these three components to say, I've documented the process, I've documented all the things that go into every step, resources, risks, RACEs, cost, time, everything like that. Now I've got to show change. Let me run these different simulations on what's happening. Now let me eventually, right? Once you start to get into it, is let me have this continuous monitoring, right? Which is mining. Show me what's happening today, and now let me feed that back into the simulation and modeling, right? That's the best way. The way I've seen that we've been trying to kind of push our clients to is go from, your beginning to your end, and being able to monitor all this stuff is super helpful. And then simulate it becomes even more critical, I think, in the name of this game. And probably there's 100 other things that I'm sure I didn't add here, but in the last couple of years, these are the things that we've kind of, felt, you know, both the good and bad, and things that we've pivoted on. And I think it's been really helpful for the clients that we've worked with.
Well, Nilesh, we certainly appreciate you sharing with everyone, and giving us a flavor from the practitioner side. Obviously, as someone that's part of the company that builds the technology, it's always great to hear how our customers are using it in various ways and the results that they're seeing. And like you said, the good, bad, and the ugly, how it can be made better. Like we love that challenge, and we love making the product better so it better serves your need. And we love hearing when I think you used the word amazing at one point. Love to hear accolades like that as well. So certainly appreciate you taking the time to share the stories. I think at this point, let's jump to questions, because maybe some of those other 100 that you said you probably learned but didn't say, maybe it'll come up in the questions. I think I'm actually going to take this first one here, and then if you have anything to add, please do so. But they said, I understand that the simulation is tech-based, but how manual, tech-based / automated is the process mapping and visualization before the simulation? And they followed up with process mining is not always able to go to industry-specific systems, for example, actuarial software. How do you deal with that? And so I think that there's a number of different ways that you can visualize processes. Obviously, if it is a system that process mining can be used for, you can generate those maps automatically based on the data that's in the systems. But even for some of those processes, there's going to be activity that happens off system, right? And the only way you're going to get that information is from the people that are actually executing them. So you can do things like working with the stakeholders, like Nilesh mentioned. You can do the time and motion studies. With iGrafx specific, and actually, sorry, I should say, Nilesh already mentioned there's plenty of just great 2D diagramming tools out there, Lucid, Visio, things like that. At iGrafx, we approach it a little bit differently. We, of course, also have those 2D diagramming capabilities in the software, but we also make it easier to consume that information from the various parties involved. So there's a feature called Quick Map, where you can, using just a table structure, you don't need to know diagramming at all. You can just describe what happens in the process and it'll generate a map. We've also just recently launched something with AI where you can have a conversation and build a process map off of that. So the short answer is you need to get the information out of people's heads. The longer answer is you should use the right technology depending on who the person is that you need to get the information out of their heads. Nilesh, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
No, I think you said it well. I think one of the other questions was around, how do you add the components to every step, time, money, cost, things like all that. Max, to your point, you need to be able to have the conversations with the right people, right? Now, I wouldn't we've never, for obvious reasons, gone to say, well, how much is your, fully loaded cost as a person doing this work, right? I mean, obviously you don't do that. But what you do is for the at the right level of leadership, you do have to make some assumptions. Again, this is not going to be rooted in down to the penny, right? You have to make a few assumptions that say for this role, you can say it's about 100K per year, right? Of the resources times 5 resources, right? 500K per year. Again, assumptions, rounded numbers, um, the ability to uh, make paint that picture without having to go down into the perfect amount of detail. Now, we've had many clients that have basically said, well, I don't trust that your cost data is right. Okay, then don't use the cost data, right? Like we are making the right assumptions for based on what we know, right? Based on the problems we are trying to solve here. But again, it's to the prerogative of the leadership team of what you want to be able to use, what problems you're trying to solve, to do that. But I think what we've found best is put as much information in as you can that you feel comfortable putting it in that's directional still, and then be able to pull it out. And you can say, fine, we don't want to run cost analysis, it's fine, right? Ignore that whole thing. But time is relative. You can get probably most of the time information from talking to folks. If there's appetite, do a time and motion study for 2 weeks, right? Get enough data from an 80-hour work week or so. You can then figure it out and extrapolate from there. We've done that. We've done a month of time, basically time entry, right? We created ability for folks to put time in based on certain things that they're doing at one of our clients. And we accounted for seasonality, we accounted for long term, 1 year, and said, okay, so on average, this takes you about, 200 hours a year. Okay, great. And then we validate that with the stakeholder, obviously. We also understand that there's some bias in there. So we try to remove that bias by pressure testing. What do you actually do, right? The operational excellence here, like, why does this actually take 200 hours, right, per year? What are you doing? Like once you start digging into that, then you can get into your granularity that I think you need. But it does take time. Again, this is a tool. This is not going to solve every problem. This is not going to be able to automatically tell you how long things are going, especially for those processes that are not in the system itself. Um, and so if you can get, this is why I say it's anecdotal and directional. If you set that expectation ahead of time, you can actually come up with still really good data-driven decisions, just not, minutia granularity of data coming out from there.
Yeah, and Nilesh, I understand you have a hard stop here at the top of the hour. Gotta do some important client work. So I think that's probably all the time we have for now. Again, if there are remaining questions, we'll be sure to pass those along and get answers to those folks that didn't get their questions answered today. But I just wanted to give one more round of thanks. Thank you to everybody on the line for hopping on today to hear Nilesh's story. It's a great one. Nilesh, I want to thank you for being here. We certainly appreciate you having you on as iGrafx. I personally appreciate you being here. It's always a great time. I'm sure that the audience got something valuable out of it. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to follow up. We're happy to tackle them. Nilesh, any closing words you want to say?
No, and thanks, Max. I think power of this tool is kind of how you use it. Again, don't go searching for a problem because we have simulation. But it is something that we've found very useful, and we're going to continue using it going forward. And lastly, I'm happy to answer questions offline. We can pass them through Max to me. Max, you're okay to send my email out if need be. Feel free to reach out directly, and so that way we can kind of help each other out.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the week. Enjoy the rest of the day. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.